Welcome, everyone. Hello. Welcome to today's unique webinar, Penguin Random House Editors Picks for Spring and Summer 2025. I'm Donna Seaman, Editor-in-Chief and Adult Books Editor at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. A link to today's title list was included in the reminder email you received from Zoom an hour ago. To download it, please open the email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link. You can also download the title list by copying the URL on the screen. If you have any trouble, just contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. You are in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we will pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the program. Booklist offers closed captioning on all our webinars. To enable or disable them on your screen, look for and click the Show Captions icon on the toolbar. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size at any time by selecting Caption Settings. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect and fairness. Anyone who violates the standard of behavior, including engaging in any form of harassment, may, at the discretion of the organizers, be immediately removed. All right, so we have a truly wonderful and quite unusual program for you today. Let's meet our very impressive panel of accomplished book editors. I'm going to introduce each with their bios, and then we will have a group conversation. So I'm beginning with Lee Boudreaux. Lee Boudreaux is the Vice President and Executive Editor at Doubleday. She joined the group in 2018 and publishes exclusively fiction. She seeks out unexpected stories and original voices in novels notable for their mastery of language and commanding narrative momentum, as well as, not infrequently, their razor-sharp sense of humor. Lee's current list of authors includes Margaret Atwood, who needs no introduction, Kate Atkinson, Kelly Barnhill, Kevin Barry, Claire Beams, Michael Crummy, Percival Everett, Holly Gramazio, C.J. Hauser, Ron Rash, and Colin Welsh. Many of Lee's books, many of the books Lee has edited, have been selected for national book clubs run by Oprah Winfrey, Good Morning America, Jenna Bush, and Reese Witherspoon. Her books have won or been nominated for the National Book Award, the Booker Prize, the MBCC Awards, the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Orange Prize, and numerous PEN Awards. It's so impressive. And next we have Amy Einhorn. Amy is the Senior Vice President and Publisher for Fiction at Crown. Previously, Amy was President at Henry Holt & Company, Publisher at Flatiron Books, and she had her own imprint, Amy Einhorn Books, at Putnam. Amy has edited many New York Times best-selling fiction authors, including Leanne Moriarty, Chris Whitaker, National Book nominee Min Jin Lee, Sarah Blake, Laurie Frankel, Yangtze Chu, Kristen Harmel, Eleanor Brown, Fran Littlewood, and David Gillum, as well as best-selling memoirs and narrative nonfiction by James Comey, Jenny Lawson, Amy Sedaris, Mary Louise Kelly, and Isaac Mizrahi. Sarah McGrath is our next editor. Sarah is Senior Vice President, Editor-in-Chief of Riverhead Books, where her best-selling authors have won numerous awards. You get the theme here, from the National Book Award to the Pulitzer Prize. Novels Sarah's published in the last few years include many beloved library favorites, such as The Paper Palace, Trust, Matrix, This Time Tomorrow, The Vanishing Half, All Fours, and The God of the Woods. It was 10 years ago at an event much like this one when she launched something called The Girl on the Train. Its soaring library orders became a clear harbinger of its future success, so she is delighted to be back with us today. And one more editor for us today, Tricia Narwani. Tricia is the editor-in-chief and co-publisher of Del Rey Books, where she works with such authors as Silvia Moreno Garcia, Pierce Brown, Ava Reed, Sarah L. Elfrey, Heather Fawcett, Liam Rivera, Karen Lord, Brian Lee O'Malley, and M.L. Wang. Welcome to all of you. I will now invite everyone to turn on their cameras. And we're going to start with you, Lee. What do you have for us today?
Hi there. It's so great to be here. And by the way, I was in the room 10 years ago when Sarah launched Girl on the Train. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I've never heard a book come out of an editor's mouth and sound like such an instant bestseller in my life. So you guys have an excellent front row seat to newly arriving fiction. So I'm going to mention two debut novels. It's something I absolutely love to publish. And so I've got one on the spring list and one on the summer list. And on the spring list, we'll be bringing you Jemima Way's The Original Daughter. And this is a novel set in Singapore at the turn of the century, and it focuses primarily on sisters. One is adopted into the home at the age of 7. The biological daughter is 8 years old at the time, and they become absolutely inseparable. They live in a very working class neighborhood, and academic perfection is the only ticket out. And they eschew all other outside activities, other friendships. They are just completely entwined with one another on this march forward. One of them flames out, and the other one not only kind of goes on to usurp her place, but even borrows, plagiarizes, steals an episode of her sister's life in order to sort of make her own launch into the world a little bit more successful. So it is a story about mother-daughter relationships, sisterhood, family dynamics, secrets, betrayal, and whether or not this level of betrayal, the person you love most in the world, whether a betrayal by them can ever be repaired. And it's taking place against the backdrop, or rather the ticking clock of the mother who has a terminal diagnosis. So whether these sisters are going to reconcile in time to both be by the mother's bedside, or if one of them is going to sort of take this war to the next level by excluding someone from the bedside of a beloved mother figure, you're just hoping that doesn't come true the whole time you're reading. The language of this novel is absolutely beautiful. Whenever I'm asked what it is I'm looking for, I never have a good answer. And it's sort of like I'm looking for a sentence that just stops me in my tracks. And Jemima is incapable of writing a sentence that doesn't do that. The backdrop of Singapore in the early aughts, the YouTube phenomenon is just beginning. That's what these two young women look at when the academic path begins to sort of shut down on them. It's just the moment of getting to be famous for being a personality instead of having sort of accomplished something a little more tangible than that. So it's an exciting place to be. Jemima herself grew up in Singapore, and at the age of 18, she was wandering around a mall looking for a movie theater and got hopelessly lost and made this funny video of herself looking for the door. And she posted it, and it went viral, and she ended up getting offered a job as like an online product hostess kind of thing, like the earliest incorporation of an influencer. And she spent about 10 years doing that as a full-time student, saved up all of her money, and sent herself to the writing program at Columbia to get her MFA. So she really like put all of her eggs in one basket and said, I'm going to be a writer, and I'm going to the US for a couple of years, and I'm going to see if I can make that happen. And then she became a Stegner Fellow. So I think she is sort of a first-class literary writer. She is writing a book that I would put in the same category of as Claire Lombardo, whom I publish, or Celeste Ng, in terms of the depth and richness of the family dynamic she is able to bring to you. And my summer book that I'll tell you about sounds slightly unhinged, but this is the thing I love the most about it. Maria Riva, her family emigrated from Ukraine when she was very young, and she grew up in Canada. And I published her a few years ago a short story collection called Good Citizens Need Not Fear. And it was all about every character lived in one building in Ukraine that had been built from the rubble left over when they built the two buildings they intended to build. So it's just this like, built out of the leftovers. It doesn't have an address. It's not in any of the official books. So every time there's a problem with the building, Maria's father in real life would have to march down to the bureaucratic office and say, there's no heat in the building, or the mail isn't being delivered. And the bureaucrats would look through their book and they would be like, is no building there? And he would have to go through the surreal process of convincing the government their building actually exists in order to have them do anything for the inhabitants. That book published right into the pandemic, the paperback published into the pandemic. You may imagine it was not high time to discover short stories. But she's come to us with her debut novel, and it's one of those books that I loved the first time I read it. And then when I read the final revision, I realized she had done something so much more daring than I had ever imagined. On the face of it, this novel, which is called Endling, is about three women, one of whom is a extinct snail scientist who keeps dying species alive in her mobile lab, trying to get them to breed before they're completely snuffed out from this earth, and two sisters, all of whom are making money in the sort of mail order bride industry, where Western bachelors come to Ukraine looking for docile women who have not been corrupted by modernity or feminism. That's not what these women are all about, but they're happy to make some cash on the side while pretending to be involved in this dating scenario. Halfway through the book, they decide that the best way to get publicity for this exploitative industry in order to bring it down is to kidnap 12 of the Western bachelors and drive them in the snail lab to the border, where they will have a huge press conference. Well, halfway through this journey, Russia invades Ukraine. That is where Maria was in writing a book about sort of mail order brides, when her homeland is invaded and she thinks, I can't possibly continue writing something so frivolous. And then she remembers something George Saunders wrote about writing a novel and how it's like a village of yurts sort of sewn together. And she decides that if she incorporates all the surrealness of her life, she talks to her family back in Ukraine and she can hear the bombs going off behind them on the Zoom call, but her grandfather, who's hard of hearing, can't hear the bombs. It's like she knows more about what's going on behind him than he does, even though she's half a world away. She tries to incorporate some of this unreality onto the page. And sure enough, halfway through this book, it kind of screeches to a halt. The author kind of begins to present herself on the page with her characters. At one point, she sends the characters in their van into Kherson to get the grandfather out of his apartment because the family never could convince him to actually do that. It's one of the most moving scenes I've ever seen. She writes 4, I think, chapter 45s, where the character keeps going to the grandfather's door, he opens it, and she tries to convince him to leave. And one time he comes out with a suitcase, and one time he brings her some chicken soup to eat, and she never can quite convince him. And you're watching the author kind of try and try and try again to change reality on the ground. So the book is actually incredibly funny to read. The characters are hilarious. The dialogue is funny. The setup, I mean, just say extinct snails enough times, you're going to laugh. Endling is actually the name of a species that is about to be stamped out. I mean, it's got so many dark, macabre sort of elements to it. The characters are fabulous. And when she starts doing this autofiction, metafiction spin in the middle, you just kind of say, oh my God, I thought we were talking about mail order brides, but we're talking about loss and absence and war and the oddness of knowing violence is being perpetrated somewhere where you can't see it, but news of it reaches you all the time, and the way your illusion of safety, of security is punctured or not as this happens to you. As I was thinking about who to send to for blurbs, I was kind of like, okay, out of my own publishing history, the book this reminds me the most of is Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. And when I was working on that, I was like, I'm going to talk about the Iraq War and a Dallas Cowboys football game. This makes no sense to anyone, but it did. And that book went on to, be a National Book Award nominee and win the NBCC award. Maria is honestly on that plane. She is talking about both the comedy and horror of modern life in a way that is so wildly imaginative. There aren't that many other writers that come to mind when I think of her. And the other person I thought of, and I do not say this lightly, is Percival Everett, who's book James I've also worked on this year. And I just thought he's honestly an apt comparison for somebody who is able to take a wildly, again, daring sense of humor and bring it to the most serious subjects we have to discuss. So those are the two books I am highlighting for spring and summer. And thank you all for everything you've done to make so many books work over so many years. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Lee. That was truly amazing. Those books sound great. Thank you so much. So, Amy, you're up next. What have you got for us?
Okay, I just want to say when I saw the list, I was like, darn it, I can't believe I have to go after Lee, because I remember coming to some presentation once and someone turning to me and saying, Lee Boudreaux is the best presenter in publishing. And also I will say, looking at the other presenters, if anyone ever wanted to have an inferiority complex, just be on a panel with these women, and there you go. So anyway, before I start, I just wanted to say thank you. It's such an honor to be here and to be talking to you. I will say my father is 91 years old, and he's getting much older, and we've been doing a lot of sort of going through family history, and my pretty much earliest memories are going to the library with my dad. That's what we did together. And so thank you for that. And thank you for everything that you're doing. Crown actually had stopped publishing fiction. For those of you who don't know, we published, the last novel that Crown published was actually Normal People. And then Crown kind of took a break. Anyway, so it's been a year now since we've been back doing fiction. We did Chris Whitaker's All the Colors of the Dark, which you guys have been so incredibly wonderful about. So I wanted to thank you for that. The first book I'm going to talk about is Lucky Night by Eliza Kennedy. This is a novel that starts with a man and a woman who have been having an affair for 6 years, married to other people. They've never spent the night together. The man finally says, I'm going to book a room in this very fancy new hotel in Manhattan. We're going to spend the night together. So the novel starts with them having sex, and the fire alarm goes off. And they call downstairs and they say, oh, it's been doing that all week. Something's wrong with the electrical system. It's fine. They go back to having sex. Fire alarm goes off again. You can tell where this is going. This is a novel that's very much for anyone who's listened to the Talking Head song, and the Talking Head song, and you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife and ask yourself, how did I get here? That's what this book is. It's all about, am I with the right person? Did I make the right choices in life? Does my life have meaning? Is it possible to live an authentic, honest life? At the risk of sounding like a cliched Hollywood person, because I swear I'm not, because we're in publishing, but my pitch on this has always been that this has the existential angst of Tom Perrotta, and it meets the electric dialogue of Aaron Sorkin, and it meets the drama of the Towering Inferno, which maybe the Towering Inferno doesn't mean anything to anyone anymore because I'm so old, but that was like a very big movie for me. So this is the novel. We have early raves from Jenny Jackson, who calls it dazzling, Kate Christensen, who calls it a tour de force, and actually Tom Perrotta just gave us a blurb. I think this is for the same readers who have been devouring All Fours by Miranda July or Sandwich by Catherine Newman. And lastly, at the risk of sounding like thou dost protest too much, I know this sounds like a very sexual book, but I don't know how many of you have ever, any of you have watched Sex Education. It's a British TV show. And it's ostensibly all about sex. But then when you start realizing it, you realize it's actually not about sex. It's just incredibly sweet. This is really not a novel about sex. It's a novel about midlife, and I just think it's brilliant. And I should say the ending is leaving people gobsmacked. So they finish reading it and then they run over and they want to have impromptu book groups with me. So that is Lucky Night. And then we're going to move on to The Correspondent. Can you guys see that? I don't know why I'm asking you because no one's answering, so that's fine. Okay, so The Correspondent. So there's actually two books that people have kept coming to me about, and this is the second one, because they finish reading this and then they come over and they're like, oh my God, I was crying, I was laughing. There's a lot of comparisons to Olive Kitteridge. It is a novel, an epistolary novel about a 73-year-old woman, and it's letters to and from her and through these letters, we see not only that Sybil, who's the main character, is in the winter of her life, but that she's yet to come to terms with some of the really fundamental things that have formed and shaped her life. And as opposed to sort of, I think there's this thing in literature now where we have old people and we make them sort of like sweet and funny and cantankerous. That is not Sybil. She is real. She has lived a life. And to give you a taste of this, just in one of the exchanges, Sybil has written letters to the president of this university. She really wants to audit this class, and they won't let her audit this class. So she amps it up. She writes to the president, and they keep going back and forth. And then at one point, you realize that they've obviously somehow come to some detente, because the president writes her back, and at the risk of sort of, I know we're never supposed to read stuff, but I'm going to. In one of the letters, the woman writes back to her and says, "You asked about my summer holiday. Most of June was crap. Spent planning for the semester and putting out fires. My mother-in-law passed away, and our recent round of IVF failed." Then it goes on. And at the end, the president says to her, "And yes, I will go into the years you said, boldly, unapologetically, head up, and not taking bullshit from anyone with a penis. You seem a worthy person to offer such advice." Sybil is writing letters to Ann Patchett and Larry McMurtry and saying things like, "I liked your most recent book, but I didn't think it was good as the other one." Joan Didion, and then they write back to her. And I should say that the correspondence between Sybil and Larry McMurtry is some of the most amazing writing about writing that I have ever read. Books and authors play a huge role in this. And actually, I don't know if this will work, but I'm just going to put in the chat all the novels that are featured in the book, so you can see how much this is really a book about writing, and the power of, let's see, does this work? I think it worked. Okay. So we have, the book is kind of, to me, like The Little Book That Could. It's this novel about this 73-year-old woman, but we've had preamps in Germany and Italy. It's being bought all over the world. It's starting to feel like that little book that could, with that little sprinkle of fairy dust. And I should say, Virginia Evans, this is her first novel, but it's actually, she has 9 novels that she's written that have been in her nightstand. And finally, she and her husband decided to pursue her dream. And so they quit their jobs. They moved to Ireland so she could get her MFA. She told me when she found out that we were publishing her book, she said she went out and bought us a cashmere sweater at J. Crew, and then she added that it was full price, which I kind of loved. It's just, I think this novel is kind of everything as to what we look for in literature. And as Ann Patchett has said about it, it is a cause for celebration, and I very much believe that. So that's the correspondent. And then I'm going to switch to something very different. And I don't know if I can do this, because again, I realize that we're doing this on a virtual thing, but I'm curious. So the next book is The Great Man by Kira Davis Lurie. And I'm curious, I don't know if you can do it in the chat, but can anyone tell me if they know if there were any characters of color in The Great Gatsby? And if so, when did they appear? And I can't see anybody and no one's writing, so I don't know if that means that no one's answering.
The audience needs to use the Q&A box.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
Sorry, I'm in the wrong box.
Jump in. Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm going to see if there's anyone. No, there's no one in there yet. But
okay. Well, I'm just going to assume that people aren't going to get this because nobody here got this. So the only time that there appear any characters of color in The Great Gatsby is there's a scene where Nick is driving across a bridge and there's another car coming this way. And Nick is incredibly bemused and befuddled to see there are 3 very well-dressed Black women in the back, and they're being driven by a chauffeur. And Kira Davis Lurie grew up loving The Great Gatsby, but as a Black American woman, she really had a very hard time trying to reconcile her affection for this novel with the reality of the fact that the author was very much a product of his time. So The Great Man is inspired by The Great Gatsby. It's set in 1945 amongst the Black elite of LA. It looks at the neighborhood of West Adam Heights, which was then known as Sugar Hill. And this is all true. There were racial covenants back then, which prohibited Black people from living in certain parts of the city. And the novel starts with a young Black man who has just come back from the war, who finds himself in LA, which on one hand seems like this time of limitless possibilities, but at the other time is also this time of continued persecution. Again, it's based on a true case. It's peopled with real life characters such as Hattie McDaniels, who's just won her Oscar for Gone with the Wind, Lena Horne, who had a boarding house that gave other African Americans opportunities for places to live. And one of the reasons that Shannon Chris, who's the editor of this book, one of the reasons she was so attracted to this is Shannon's grandmother ran a boarding house, and she loved the idea of being able to tell the story of how Black women have paved the way for others. There's an author's note in this book that even if you're not interested in the book and you don't want to read it, I would beg you to just read the author's note, because Kira is so much more articulate and eloquent than I can possibly be as for her reasons for why she wrote the book. And I should just say it's really emerging as an in-house favorite. We think we're going to get a lot of publicity for this. It's actually, we're publishing next year is the 100th anniversary of The Great Gatsby. Again, The Great Man, I think it's a gorgeous cover. Hope you agree. And then lastly, I'm just going to do very quickly. This is a novel called The Letter Carrier. I'm going to try and pronounce this woman's name, Francesca Giannoni. I should say my French teacher said I spoke French with a New Jersey accent, so I don't know what my Italian accent is. This book has sold over 500,000 copies in Italy, which is close to the equivalent of 3 million copies in the US. It has become a phenomenon. It's been translated in 37 countries around the world. This is going to be the first time it's published in English. And the novel takes place, this woman, beautiful woman, gets off this train in this small town in southern Italy in 1934. And she brings with her this air of modernity. And she's not going to be the person who, like all the other housewives, who gossips in the town square and then goes home and gets her husband's dinner ready. She becomes the town's first female postmistress and becomes the nexus of this town and the invisible thread. And she is currying letters between lovers. She basically is the focal point of this town. So this is a novel about forbidden love. There are small town feuds. You feel like you are one of the residents of this town. And I guess I will just say obliquely, for any of us these days who are looking to escape into fiction and perhaps escape to another country, I think The Letter Carrier might just be the perfect book. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you.
That was fantastic, Amy. Thank you. So captivating, each of these stories. It's hard when you switch to the next one. All right, next we have Sarah McGrath. Sarah, what do you have for us today?
Hi, thanks for having me. I do love these opportunities. I wish I could see all of the librarians, but it is fun to imagine you all out there. And I also said yes to doing this because I saw the roster of editors I would be with, and it is like an honor to listen to you guys pitch. Those are all such great books. I am going to talk about 3 books, but I'm going to talk mostly about one, and then like a little bit about 2 others. The one I'm going to concentrate on is called Consider Yourself Kissed. And the reason I'm going to concentrate on it is because I think it is just made for the library audience in particular. So like 20 years ago, I read, like everybody else, I read and fell in love with David Nichols's One Day. And for all the time after that, I sort of wanted to find my own really stellar literary love story, but one with a happier ending. And in some ways, this is that, but different, and you'll hear why. So it's not a genre romance, but it is told with it's a hopeful, emotional story told with depth and humor. Jess is a Australian writer living in London, and this is her American debut. So it's not a rom-com. It is more the story of what happens after the credits run on the rom-com. It's the 10 years past the sort of the meeting and the coming together. And so Consider Yourself Kissed gives us 10 years in the life of one woman as she's trying to figure out what happily ever after really looks like if you're a grown-up. The main character is Coralie. At the start, she's 29 years old, and she's an Australian, sort of adrift in London when she meets Adam. And he's very crush-worthy. He is a gentlemanly, divorced father of a 4-year-old. He's smart and he's funny. He's an aspiring journalist. He's a 1/4 inch taller than the average British male, which is very important to him. And they fall in love fast. Because you're librarians, I'm going to tell you the story of their first date a little bit, though, because this is where I really fell in love with the book. Is they're on their first date, and Coralie's really tired because her apartment is over a bar and it's been playing musical really loud. And so they don't go home together. They swap apartments for the night. And so she goes to his apartment. They've just met. She goes to his apartment. He goes to her apartment. And then they talk on the phone from their opposite apartments as they look through each other's bookshelves. So they get to know each other through the books on their shelves, and we get to know them through the books on their shelves. It's very detailed, the books that are out there. You will recognize many of them. And it's so romantic. I love the idea of falling in love with somebody through their books first. Anyway, they come together, they fall in love, they move in together, they juggle jobs and kids and stepkids and aging parents and siblings and, life. And they have to keep their love going across all this change. So it becomes the story of falling in love with the perfect person, but then staying in love. And what happens when you wildly love someone one minute and then like really don't the next, or about, loving your children more than anything, but also kind of sometimes dreaming of escaping them. It's about balancing work. It's about the stifling, repetitive love-hate relationship we have with domesticity. In short, I think it's a book about being a woman now. It is full of perfect one-liners. It has some pretty good swearing. It made me laugh out loud, but it also made me cry. It's not sad, but it made me cry because it made me feel so understood. I was crying at one point. I was on an airplane. It was very embarrassing, both for Coralie and for myself, because Jessica Stanley sees what it is to be a woman juggling everything, who has made a family with seemingly the perfect man. And then it turns out that's not actually the secret to life after all. And, she finally has all the things she thought she wanted, but in gaining all those things, she's kind of lost the thing she originally had, which was herself. And so what she does about it, I won't tell you what she does about it and how Adam responds to it. It's so perfect. And that is what made me cry. I also will add, because it's election season, it's also really about the ways that our domestic lives are affected by what else is happening in the world, our jobs, and also public events. The story is set against this like dramatically eventful sort of soap opera period in British decade that included Boris Johnson and Brexit and COVID. And it really gets at how the intimate dramas of our lives sort of have to compete for energy with the shared public events. I really related. I am no student of British news or politics. I think it made me love it more because I felt no shame. If the background music had been American politics, I might actually have enjoyed it less. But this was just entertainment for me. And, the book sees that our domestic lives don't exist in a vacuum. The challenge is keeping love going, even when the outside world feels unreliable. It's funny, it's profound, it's just addictively good. We have rom-com queen Annabelle Monaghan calls it a love song to women everywhere, which I think is true. And literary sweet spot queen Meg Wolitzer calls it an absorbing family drama. One of my readers said for her it was therapizing, which me too. So it's really good, and I think you'll love it. And that is coming at the end of May. And then two more debuts, two American debuts. Let's see which one first. We'll do Sleep by Honor Jones. This is coming in early May. So Honor is just this extravagantly talented new writer. I actually discovered her through these essays, personal essays she wrote in the Atlantic, where she's an editor. She's also previously an editor at the Times op-ed section, but she's an editor for the Atlantic. But she wrote these essays about her own divorce, which went viral, and I just was really struck by them. And then I fell in love with this novel, which has a little bit of that in it. And what really first got me about this book is the incredibly exquisite way she writes about childhood and what it feels like to be a 10-year-old girl with a slightly dangerous family. Sleep opens when 10-year-old Margaret is enjoying her childhood of, sunlit swimming pools and sleepovers and Saturday pancakes. But there's a secret, and that before the end of the summer, her kind of idyllic childhood, girlhood slips away. And then the story jumps 25 years into the future, and it continues to go back and forth through the book. When Margaret is newly divorced, she has a new lover. Without the lover, she brings her children back to visit the house where she grew up with her parents are still there. And she's sort of forced to confront the secrets. And now we get to see that same childhood kind of through the rearview mirror from the perspective of her adulthood. And I just thought, not since The Paper Palace have I seen a debut author write so memorably about the intertwining of childhood and adulthood, about parents and children and sex and divorce. And sort of like that book, Sleep invites us into this privileged childhood in which the adults have failed to protect the children. And draws this very direct line between the family we're born into and the family we then create for ourselves, and that you can't separate them. Ann Patchett has called it haunting and beautiful and incredibly moving. Courtney Sullivan called it propulsive and funny and heartbreaking. She's just such a talent, and I'm excited for people to discover her. And then finally, Among Friends by Hal Ebed. Hal Ebed is a writer, unlike Honor, who sort of comes from magazines, and Hal came out of nowhere. And I felt like when I first met him, I was reminded of when I first met Amor Towles, who I have not published. I tried to. And first time I met Amor Towles, he seemed to have sort of come out of nowhere into this kind of literary brilliance. And Hal has some of that, like Amor, he feels like it's sort of an old school master. He's like in his early 30s. But anyway, just like traditional literary brilliance, with this book that is swift and shocking and heartbreaking and unputdownable. So Among Friends is the story of these two intertwined families where the adults have been friends for 30 years and their 16-year-olds have grown up side by side. This is the kind of foundational friendship where, maybe you meet in college and then this is your person and your lives grow up together. So like the career you choose is because of this friend. You met your wife because your friend introduced you to her. That you live in this place because so does your friend. Their lives just don't really exist without each other. And when you have a friendship like that, it makes it very hard to imagine what would happen to your finely made life if you had to extract that friend from your life. So in this story, what starts as a birthday celebration, both families are upstate for one of them, the 52nd birthday. It devolves into a kind of reckoning when one of the men does something unforeseen and horrible. It's a brutal betrayal, and it forces other secrets to the surface. And it compromises the ground on which everything has been built. And it makes this character's question, would you give up your family for the sake of your best friend? Would you give up your best friend for the sake of your family? What would you sacrifice for the life that you have so carefully built? I'm sure you think you know the answers, but Hal brings us so deeply into the psychology of these characters that is in a way that's really very surprising and riveting. We have blurbs from Richard Ford and Lee's excellent author, Claire Lombardo, and I'm excited to introduce him to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. I love all the energy. I think people talk with their hands. You think maybe people who spend their life at desks are sort of still, but we're not. We talk with our hands. Tricia, you're up next. I think maybe you're talking about some trends. I'm not sure.
Oh,
I leave
a
it to you.
little bit of everything. So first, I
great.
wanted to say Thank you so much for having me here. I'm daughter of immigrants, and school and public libraries are really how I accessed books as a kid. So in a very real way, libraries are why I'm here today. So thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be here in such fabulous company. You all have worked on so many of my favorite books. And today you've pitched my future favorite books. So thank you. Um, so I'm going to start by talking about one of the books of my heart, and that is Water Moon by Samantha Sato Yambao. This is a cozy fantasy that really feels like a cross between Erin Morgenstern and Studio Ghibli, and it's about a magical pawn shop where you can sell your regrets. So just imagine yourself in Tokyo on a rainy day. Maybe you're thinking about that book you never wrote or your lost love that you haven't seen in years. You wander into a cozy ramen shop, but when you arrive, it's not a ramen shop at all. And you're greeted by an old man who offers you a cup of green tea and offers to take those painful memories away in exchange for peace of mind. The story is about what happens when this pawn shop owner goes missing and his daughter has to travel through a magical world to find him. And she's accompanied by a very cute and charming physicist who might have something to do with her life's destiny. So I described this as a cozy fantasy, and cozy fantasies are often associated with very gentle, wholesome, low stakes storytelling. But for me, I'm most excited by that type of story when there's a little bit of melancholy and wistfulness. And that's what really drew me to this book. It really takes these questions of um, how do our failures and mistakes shape who we are? And how do our memories create who we are in the future? It takes those things very seriously. And there's a level of loneliness and heartbreak that makes the wonderfully soaring, happy ending all the brighter. I think in cozy fantasy, you need a little bit of that darkness for the light to shine through. Um, I read this book in a single day, cried many times, and the story behind the book is just as touching as the story itself. This is actually not a debut novel. The author, Sam Yambao, wrote a couple of historical novels 10 years ago. They didn't quite connect, and she ended up moving on to start a family, has a very joyous and happy life with her family. But during the pandemic, she felt the allure of her old dreams come back. And this story was inspired by that feeling of those lost dreams that we've let go of and that maybe we shouldn't have. Um, I also wanted to take a quick moment to talk about the jacket because it is something really special. Our art director read this book and was so inspired by the read that she came up with something really unique. So we have our beautiful jacket illustration on the outside. The reverse is an image of our couple, each on either side of the jacket. On the end papers is instructions for folding the jacket into an origami boat that will bring the couple together. And it encourages you to put your regrets into the boat and let them sail away. It's all about this theme of surrendering something precious to get something even more precious in return. So this is a book that I just feel like it's one of those books that's like you give it to someone and it feels like you're giving them a gift. And I'm so excited for readers to discover this book in January 25 when it comes out. So for something completely different, for my next book, I'm often asked about what's the next big trend in romantic fantasy that's been the most dominant trend in my category. And my answer is that it's not actually fantasy, it's dystopian science fiction. Yes, just like the Hunger Games and Divergent dystopian stories we all loved in the aughts and in the 2010s. There's so much nostalgia for the pop culture of that time. And our author, Danny Francis, is bringing all of those feelings back in a steamier, spicier way with Silver Elite, which we in-house call Spicy Divergent. One of the joys of working at Del Rey is that we are all genuinely fans of the genres that we work in. And the in-house reads for this have been just off the charts. My team is absolutely feral for the modern Divergent vibes. So we're so excited for romantasy fans to discover something a little bit different in that genre. And last of all, I wanted to talk about one of the trends that is personally most exciting to me, which has been the rise of horror. I've always been a big horror fan. I got into speculative fiction because of Stephen King and Clive Barker and Anne Rice. And I'm so excited that I get to like walk on that dark side again as an editor. I think that the rise of horror in publishing has partly been driven by pop culture, by films by Jordan Peele and Ari Aster, and TV shows by Mike Flanagan that have shown people that horror can be a vehicle for deeply human storytelling. This is something that like us horror fans have known all along, but I think has become more mainstream in recent years. And that makes one of my authors, Chuck Wendig, the perfect author for this moment. We like to call Chuck the Stephen King for the Stranger Things generation, and also the dark conscience of America. He's so good at this like Needful Things style, like small town, dark Americana horror. Um, but I also think that one of the reasons that people have been embracing horror so much is that we live in such dark times that horror gives us such a safe space to find inspiration and catharsis. And that is what his novels are all about. So his new novel, A Staircase in the Woods, starts with a really arresting image. Four teenagers go camping. They're walking in the woods when they come across a mysterious staircase to nowhere. One of the friends goes up the staircase and doesn't come back. 20 years later, the other friends return to that small town in that forest, find the staircase again, and it's time for them to discover what happened to their friend, but also what has happened to them as people and as friends in those years that have passed. So it's such a combination of something like Stephen King's It or his Castle Rock stories with those like small town Americana vibes, like the Netflix shows Haunting of Hill House or The Haunting of Bly Manor. But what I love about this book is that it is ultimately about friendship and love and community and how those things can help us stand together against the darkness, which is perhaps an inspiring theme for the times that we live in right now. And that one is coming out in March 2025.
And is that it, Tricia?
Yeah, that's it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you all, everyone here. We have a little time, so I thought maybe we could have a little conversation. I'm so struck by listening to all your descriptions of all the different kinds of fiction. And I did an event over the weekend, and I've heard this question often from people, and they say, what's the difference between popular and literary fiction? What is literary fiction? And there's classically genre fiction, I can put it in its realm pretty clearly. But there's so much blurring now of especially fantasy and fiction, seeing a lot of that horror and crime, all of them kind of infiltrating general fiction, I guess you would call it. But I wonder how each of you feel about that. When are you categorizing a book? What can popular fiction be literary? Can literary fiction, be a burning story? Maybe we'll start with Lee, kind of go back to the start of the group. And yes, thank you.
Gosh, these alphabetical order things are tough.
Yeah.
No, this is something I bet all editors have a terribly difficult time trying to define. Yes, I think there is often a crossover. I am a total plot junkie. I need something to happen, and I need there to be clear narrative stakes, and I kind of like that engine to really be driving. So and I love the way all the genre stuff is blurring into it now. And I think writers like Colson Whitehead, for example, had a lot to do with that kind of like, I'm going to write a zombie book and it's going to still be, this level of literary excellence, but I can do, or I mean, Cavalier and Clay. I'd be like that when we're going to talk about comic books, but it's going to be incredibly elevated. So I love finding the books that can actually do many things at once. I mean, I think literary fiction is about I would say plot isn't foremost, you know, so like there I am, a plot junkie, but it's not gonna live on plot alone. And the language and the nuance of that and the depth of the characterization is doing as much as the plot is doing. They're living, you know, simultaneously. But that is I was once doing a book, and it was about a woman raising 4 chickens during a terrible winter, and she was trying to keep them alive as the weather got worse and worse, and like Fox came and, you know, did what they do. And she's really thinking about a personal tragedy, right? So it's about loss and learning to live with that, but it's also about chickens and bad weather. And I was on a panel like this, and I was like, you could tell it's literary fiction because all 4 chickens died at the end. And if it was more mainstream fiction, the last chicken would have lived. So that's the definition I leave you all with today. How many chickens die? That's the definition.
Oh my goodness. Amy, any thoughts on this? Chickens or no chickens?
I just feel like I've been missing. I wish, Lee, where have you been my whole life? That would have been so much easier for me when I'm going out to lunch with people and I could explain, like, does the chicken live or does the chicken die? I will say, I feel like we in publishing have this conversation a lot, and I'd be curious what people in the audience think. But my friends who are not in publishing don't say, like, I read literary books or I read commercial books. I think we tend to get very caught up in that, in a way of sort of trying to, I'm not saying you're doing this, but I think in a way we try and sort of be exclusionary, like this is literary or this is commercial. And frankly, a lot of my commercial authors want to be considered more literary. The literary authors want the sales of the commercial authors. I think, you know, I guess I would say with Lee, you know, when I started out, I would have said, oh, I love literary fiction. And it would have been, you know, I would have defined literary as sort of could be sentence by sentence, beautiful, but kind of navel gazing and not a lot happening. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, I want a story, tell me a story. And I think, to me, what I'm looking for is I think it's very easy. It's interesting. And I'd be so curious to hear the other panelists. You know, we meet with people from Hollywood all the time and they're like, what do you have? And I'm thinking, well, some of the books that I think are the best would make terrible films because it's all about the writing and it's all internal. And some of the things that I think are terrible would make great films because it's all just like story and car chases and all that kind of stuff. I want someone who's really, really good writer and who's a really good storyteller. I don't know what that makes it. I always used to say the sweet spot between literary and commercial, but again, I'm trying to get away from the terms just because I feel as if some of the stuff that I think is literary, somebody else might not, and vice versa. So I'm not giving you an answer, basically. Sorry.
That's great. I mean, that's the case. And I'm with you that I have the same very reluctant response. I'm like, well, just, you know, do you enjoy it? I mean, I think the writing's really important. I think the writing has to be really excellent. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think most consumers aren't sort of good. They think of themselves in terms of what they like. They don't think of themselves in terms of a label like that. And I think it's helpful for me to try to think more in terms of audience. So like rather than thinking about like, where is this originating? Are we going to publish it like it's literary? Or are we going to publish it like it's commercial? More just think of like, who is the reader? And my kind of goal always is to find books that straddle those readerships, right? And so, I mean, one way of saying that is it's like, you know, the literary commercial crossover, but like that's so academic sounding. It's, you know, I'm just, you know, I'm imagining certain people I know or you know, fans of certain books and certain books. Now, sometimes when you're trying to straddle too many different readerships, you miss, right? And nobody is like, oh, that's me. So that's a risk, but sometimes you get them all, right? And that's the goal. But yeah, the challenge is to, I try to remember that ultimately the words that my colleagues are using are not the words that we should be using to speak to the consumer. I mean, that we don't, yes, I need to get everyone around me excited about the book so that they can then go out into the world to talk about the book, but it really doesn't matter what the person down the hallway thinks. It matters what or a person in the bookstore or the library or whatever thinks. And so it's, you know, we need to keep in mind. What is the readership we're trying to reach, and how do we help them identify, this is what I'm looking for?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I ask also because, in Booklist we have categories, but we just have this wonderful category called general fiction, and all kinds of things go in there. So it really works. Tricia, how about you? Your books really straddle different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm totally here for all the boundaries smashing, category mixing, blurring of the lines. That's the thing that is most exciting to me. Like, give me your Frankenstein's monsters of genres. I want that. In general, like, I tend to be really excited by serious books that also have a level of like dazzling theatricality and glamour and joyfulness. And I also love commercial books that underneath those glamorous surfaces smuggle in more serious ideas. Like, I think that high art can be fun. I think that two of the most hilarious and enjoyable and bonkers books I know of are Ulysses and Moby Dick. Like, um, and when I think of like books that like can bring all these worlds together, I think about something like Sylvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic, which does all of these things at once. It is a total celebration of everything that's great about Gothic horror. You've got the haunted house, you've got the gowns, you've got the ghosts, but you also have a complete subversion of that genre and the post-colonial critique. You've got a fast-paced story with a love story with a happy ending, but you also have incredible Lovecraftian weirdness that blossoms like the mushrooms beneath the haunted house. So I think that the most exciting place is where these genres and boundaries don't exist at all.
Yes, so true. Thank you so much. Such vivid responses. And, it makes me think too, early days, there weren't all these categories. I mean, Charles Dickens was serialized in newspapers, and it was totally popular. And now it's a classic. So, well, it's wonderful to hear from all of you. I'm very excited about all these forthcoming books. Tremendous presentations. I'm going to wrap things up as the hour closes, but it's just been wonderful to have you all here. Thank you so much, Lee, Amy, Sarah, and Tricia. We're looking forward to reading these books in the new year. Please head over to Penguin Random House Library website for more editor selections, virtual author events, reading resources, and more. And to request e-galleys of the books discussed today, please visit the tiny URL on the screen. And while you are there, don't forget to register for the Book and Author Festival. That's on December 10th. Tomorrow, all of you wonderful attendees will receive an email containing links to today's video recording, the title list, the PowerPoint presentation, and the all-important certificate of completion. For more about Booklist webinars, please visit us at booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past programs and register for upcoming ones like those that you see here. Attention all library workers, educators, booksellers, and students, book lovers all. We have a special subscription offer exclusive to webinar attendees. Subscribe to Booklist now, stay on top of the latest books, glean readers' advisory guidance, and get collection development advice through print and digital editions of Booklist and access to Booklist Online, which is an enormous archive. Plus, our Booklist subscription now comes with the free digital and shareable copies of our new product for patrons, for readers, for library users, Booklist Reader. We're so proud of Booklist Reader. Scan the QR code or visit our website for more detail. Thank you again for joining us for today's wonderful webinar. One more huge thank you to our special guest and to our sponsor, Penguin Random House Library Marketing. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.